Okay. My apologies. Okay. So thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you for this beautiful opportunity. In terms of the topic, I do know that this is, most of the times, we do believe that the topic of the hijab is actually geared for females. But I would like to actually just challenge that today and bring this topic up to all the males as well that are joining us today, that similarly, such as the females have the role of the hijab, males actually have the role with encouraging and inspiring the proper hijab in their wives, in their wife, in their mother, in their sisters, in their family members. And so I do believe that this topic can go for both genders for sure. And so when we talk about the role of the hijab in today's society, it can be very personal to a lot of people, because they've really taken the hijab out of the context of an Islamic obligation and have personalized it to their comfort level. And so in today's discussion, what I hope to discuss is the hijab's importance in Islam, the French secularism and how it's impacted the hijab, Quebec's intentions in banning the hijab, and comfort or conformity in regards to the hijab. Just before we start, I would like for us to just start with this small dua that is highly recommended before anyone actually tries to pursue any knowledge. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي. And so when we discuss wearing the proper hijab, a lot of the times what we actually do is we actually start backwards. We try and encourage the female to change the way she's wearing the hijab or how she's dressing in the hijab. We try to advise her of the Islamic jurisprudence of the hijab. But honestly, that's a very absurd way to actually discuss the hijab, because we're almost starting backwards at that point. When you're telling a female to fix her hijab in terms of covering her hair or her neck, you're actually starting backwards. Because when we discuss the understanding of what the hijab is the totality of Islam. The hijab is a fundamental purpose in Islam. It's a part of it comes back down to the theology of how you believe in God. And so almost telling a girl to only fix her hijab is almost like someone broke their leg and the paramedics come and give him some Advil and tell him to just sit aside and wait for it to heal. There's actually a root problem that needs to be fixed. And so if we see that someone is struggling with wearing the proper hijab, then there's actually something bigger and deeper that needs to be addressed, more serious than her just fixing or wearing more or dressing more or dressing more modestly. And so the proper hijab is directly related to our theology in God. It's how we perceive God almost. And I'll explain what I mean. Is if you were to just ask me, what is the main reason of why we wear the hijab? I don't really want to learn much in this conversation. All I want to know is just the main purpose, just the basics. And if I were to just give you the basics of what the hijab is, it would simply be because we wear the hijab because it's an obligation by God. That's it. That's the most simple reason I could give you, and the most fundamental reason I could give you. And of course, that might sound cliche to a lot of people. It might sound so oversaid or so overused. But the reality is that just as prayer is an obligation, just as fasting is an obligation, just as any other action in Islam is an obligation, the hijab is just equally as much of an obligation to the Muslimin as it is. And the question that then comes is, how does our attitude towards the hijab directly impact our perspective of God? So what I'm trying to ask in this is, when someone says that they do not feel comfortable with wearing the hijab, or when someone says that the hijab means nothing to me, or I can't wear the hijab because I'm not ready, how is that perspective actually reflecting a perspective of how they view God? And what that comes to terms is actually that any issue with the hijab, and if you want to generalize it, any issue with an obligation in Islam, such as prayer or fasting, any issue with the hijab is actually directly rooted with an issue with God. Because we know that when Prophet Muhammad came, he was the seal of messengers, he was the seal of all religions, he came with the most perfect religion ever possible. And a part of that was his direction to the females to take their head covering, their khimar at the time, lower it, cover the hairs, and take the neck slit and cover it, the jalbib, cover it and cover that area. And so that's how we know that the hijab is mandatory, through that verse in the Quran. So when people say that the hijab is a choice, I've chosen to wear the hijab. I've decided in my life that I want to wear the hijab. There's actually something wrong with that. There's actually a fallacy in their words. Because what you did is you never chose to wear the hijab. The hijab is obligatory. You have to wear the hijab. There's no say in it. What you actually did was you actually chose to obey God. You chose to fulfill God's wishes. You chose to continue in your religion and almost come closer to God and perfect your religion. But wearing the hijab, saying that you chose to wear the hijab, is incorrect, is grammatically and contextually incorrect. None of us get to choose whether or not we want to wear the hijab. Because as conscious Muslims, as people who have decided to participate in the religion of Islam, you have consciously made the decision to partake in everything that God has ordained to be mandatory. There's no what ifs or my decision or my choice. You merely are deciding to actually obey God's commands and fulfill something greater than yourselves. Because just as you fulfill other obligations, just like you wouldn't go drinking alcohol before you start fast, or just like you wouldn't go and pray while you eat, there's things that are mandatory for you to follow and obey by. And the hijab is equally as much of a command as those. And so the question that I would like to propose to everyone is, why do we wear the hijab in prayer, even if there are no mahram around us? And so, say there are no men in that, like men, of course, other than the people that are related to you. Say that you are just praying in your bedroom all by yourself. If the sole purpose of wearing the hijab is for modesty, which a lot of girls use, which a lot of people use, when they are asked what is the main purpose of the hijab, they say modesty, chastity, covering up. If that is the sole purpose of wearing the hijab, then why is it mandatory for us to pray, even if there are no men, while we are covered? Moreover than that, why is it that when people who do not wear the hijab at a regular basis, why is it mandatory for them to wear the hijab when they want to pray? And if they pray without the hijab, of course we know their salat is batil, it's not accepted. Of course, this is actually to emphasize how important it is when the girl turns 8 years and 9 months or 9 lunar years, how important at that point in her time, at that point in her life, when God tells her that right now it is mandatory for you to wear the hijab, it's not because God is forcing her to do something that he wants to punish her or to make her, unseen in the ray of women and in the field of females. It's actually the opposite. It's because Allah knows that he is giving those females a stepping stone. He's giving those females a way to come closer to her spiritual journey towards God at a faster rate. He's giving her the first thing that she would need in order for her to come closer to God. And so when we talk about why a female wears the hijab because in order for her to reach to her spiritual perfection, in order for her to one day reach to her goal of why she's even alive in the first place, she needs to be wearing the proper hijab in order for that to be accomplished. And if she were not to wear the proper hijab, no matter how great that girl is, no matter how great that female is, she will be missing something. Something would be missing from how perfect she could have become. And likewise, if we were to reflect it on the male's perspective, it is necessary for females to wear the hijab in order for there to be a balance within society, in order for there to be more safeguard within the society. You see, something interesting a lot of females say is that when they want to refute the understanding or they want to refute the argument that the hijab, we wear the hijab for safeness, because the male gaze can sometimes be dangerous. The first thing they would say is that you're making males seem very animalistic, you're making males seem very dangerous. Of course, we're not going to that extreme. But at many times, the reason why the hijab is so important is because if we did not have our laws, if we did not have the community, if we did not have this proper understanding, this proper capability to actually understand, rationalize, determine what is okay, what is not okay, society can become very unsafe if females were to dress however they want. And if males, which they do not have a hijab, but they have a form of a hijab, they have a form of modesty, such as lowering their gaze and of course respecting females. If the males and females were not to partake in their form of hijab, then a lot of issues can arise when our basic protection is not there, such as the police system, such as our mentality, such as our conscious decisions. And so the most important thing to understand is when we try to understand the hijab, you have to understand that the hijab is so much more than a scarf. It is so much more than you just fulfilling God's wishes. It's so much more because it's directly related to who you are as a person and who you are in the eyes of Allah. And with you keeping all of this in mind, the reason I have first started with this is because I want to actually bring up a textual analysis of how Quebec views the hijab and how they have actually unjustly humiliated and unrightfully removed the hijab from its essence and from its proper position in society. With the new bans that they have proposed, for those that do not know, they have two bans. They have Bill 21, which actually bans females in Quebec from wearing the hijab in government buildings and wearing the hijab in government positions or as a teacher. And there's also the Bill 64, which actually bans females from wearing the niqab, from face covering. And so these two bills that they have proposed is honestly, I believe, the only way they actually propose these bills is by them first understanding how important the hijab is in Islam. And for that reason, I wanted to raise why it was so important for us to actually see Islam so highly and regard it so importantly. The next thing I want to discuss here is, from a sociological analysis, from a contextual analysis of Quebec's ban against Muslims, we see that the French secularism, how the French state has made themselves a part of Catholic religion, and how they have now integrated to also making it so that Muslims cannot integrate their religion in that society, is directly related to how Quebec has used Islamophobia and legitimized Islamophobia in their rules and regulations and in their society. And of course, I know that Quebec and the French, they have a very close relationship. And Quebec has now replicated the French belief and their legitimization of Islamophobia. And so when we look at French secularism, we see that it was rooted with separating itself from Catholicism. That's it. It was normally in the old times, this was what they focused on, to remove the church and the state. However, if we look at it contemporary right now, the French now are more geared and more afraid of Muslims and are more focused on actually creating a society in which the Muslims become other. And from a sociological analysis, that actually means where they have pushed Muslims aside so that, of course, the society can fear them, and so that they are not integrated into the larger society. And so if we look at this quote, we see that if during the first half of the 20th century, the separation of the church and the state was intended to displace Catholicism, in recent decades, Islam has been increasingly depicted as the new challenge for the French secularism. That is where they see God is rooted, and that is what they want to remove. Because now we know, of course, how Catholicism is it's very modernized. Yet Islam has not become modernized to the sense of what Christianity has reached. And so when we talk about this hidden agenda, when we talk about this bigger purpose of what they intend to do, this is exactly what we mean, is that there is a hidden agenda. There is something that they plan to do when they try to remove the hijab and legitimize their purpose and almost politely assert that them removing the hijab was a necessary move for society to move forward. If we look at a very prominent report that was published in France in 2003, this report is what actually led in 2004 for the government to pass a ban that of course bans the hijab in similar places such as Quebec. And so Quebec has clearly learned from its ally, the French. Islam as overtly political and patriarchal. This was written in their report on the hijab. They say that Islam as overtly political and patriarchal and described Muslim women as oppressed by the religious tradition, the hijab. The report additionally associated Islam with polygamy, genital mutilation, and forced marriages. And so when an important governmental report is written about Islam in this dehumanizing manner, then it's no surprise as to why they would ban hijab from partaking in society. The French want to wear their cape. They want to act as Superman. They want to be the superhero. And they want to save the Muslim woman and the man from their old traditions, from their old way of thinking, from their oppressive actions, and their religious beliefs and practices. And so when they talk about liberating Muslim women, they are really dehumanizing and shadowing how strong the female Muslim woman a conscious female Muslim woman is. Because they are acting as though the female woman does not know any better and is complying to wearing the hijab merely because, the men, a patriarchal society, has ordained for it to be. Prophet Muhammad as a male, as their leader, he has made it obligatory for them to wear the hijab, and so they are following a patriarchal religion. And so you can really see the hatred that these laws have towards Islam. In a very prominent book, A Dying Colonialism by Fanon in 1965, this book actually discussed how in Algeria, when the French were colonizing that area, they took steps towards destroying Algerian culture in the colony. So they thought that the only way they can actually bring the Algerian, which was of course a predominant Muslim community, they thought the only way that they can actually make that possible was for them to actually ban the hijab from being worn. Because they knew that the more females and the more males that allowed for their community members to remove the hijab, the more distant they would become from their religion. And so they really constructed the Muslim identity to be an identity that is different from the accepted general society. And so we see here that the constructed Muslims, particularly the hijabi, as the other, making the Muslim head veil a deviation from the French society and was therefore deemed unacceptable. Anyone partaking in the hijab was directly connected to a patriarchal, oppressive, old mentality. And if we were to further our analysis a little bit and look at something in which, a lot of females would be very proud to tag themselves with, which is feminism. If we were looking at a liberal feminist discourse and how they look at the French secularism and what it suggests, we would see that they perceive Muslims in two ways. They perceive female Muslims in two ways. The first way being that when a female actually follows the religion of Islam, then she is directly related to, of course, a patriarchal religion. She is naive. She is actually incapable to make decisions herself, and she does not know what is of her best interest. And the second thing is when a female actually participates in the hijab, then she is actually oppressing herself because she is covering herself. She is limiting herself to what she can wear. And so she is dehumanizing herself. And these are from the perspective of a liberal feminist discourse. And so this is why it's important to actually learn about what feminism say about Muslims in order for us to understand what type of stance we want to take. It is so sad for Western societies to very, I want to say academically, try and label Muslims in a misogyny way and in an oppressive way. Because when they academically do that, then they are actually taking a step forward towards making it so that it is actually legitimized in governments and in practices and in the more, of course, intelligent individuals. If we were to look at what liberal feminists say about Muslims, we see that the image of the veiled woman has long been captivated to the Western imagination because she epitomizes the oppressive practices of the Muslim world, thereby enabling Westerners to understand themselves as liberated and perhaps more importantly, as liberators. So again, it's this understanding that the Western community is wearing the flag, is wearing the cape, they are wearing the Superman cape, and they are liberating females, they are liberating Muslim hijabis from the oppression that she does not know she is in. They are saving us. And so in Quebec's opinion, if we were to bring it to a smaller, this was the French's larger opinion, if we were to bring it just down to the Quebec's opinion, thanks to secularism, thanks to their ability to actually, move state to the side and church to side, society has been able to move forward to modernity, which of course that's our ultimate goal, of course. And I say that sarcastically. And Islam is seen, of course, now, because of how they have academically wrote us up, Islam is seen as a symbol of oppression. And fundamentally, the hijab is what provides these people with the ability of seeing us as oppressed. The hijab to them has now represented an image of misogyny. And what's really funny is that right now we passed by Christmas, correct? And for those living in Quebec, please correct me if I'm wrong, but how many times do you see it in government buildings? How many times do you see people saying Merry Christmas to each other? Or in Easter, how many times do people actually start to celebrate for Easter openly? So if Quebec is so much of a secular state as to what they propose for them to be, then why is it okay for them to celebrate Christian practices and beliefs, but it's not okay for Muslims to wear and to consciously decide to wear an obligatory method and purpose in the religion? Because when we talked about the hijab, we said that the female Muslims have no choice of whether or not they want to wear the hijab. We should remove this understanding that females have a choice. They do not. Females, it is obligatory for you to pray. It is obligatory for you to perform khumus. It is obligatory for you to fast. It is obligatory for men to perform those as well. And so it is almost as though Quebec is telling us that you are not allowed to pray. You are not allowed to fast. You are not allowed to donate 20% of your saved income. But why is it that they are allowed to celebrate their celebrations openly? With liberal feminists, their intelligent discussion over the oppressive nature of the hijab, in their discussion, they never once academically cited a female hijabi conscious opinion on why she wears the hijab, not once. And even in news articles, in my research, when they were quoting them, directly after, you would see that the female would say that I cannot believe her justification that the hijab is not oppressive. But what's really funny is that there is over billions of people that wear the hijab. It's not a mere 100,000, there's millions. And so if 1 million people, 1 million witnesses are telling you that the hijab to them is their form of security, is their form of closeness to God, is their form of religion, who is it for them to come and say that the hijab is a form of oppression? Who is it for them to determine something when millions and millions of females are saying otherwise? And so morality, modesty, virtue, divinity, closeness to God, that's the only things that would come out of a female conscious wearer of the hijab. Our voices should be accounted more than what Quebec has given us. Our voices should be heard more and acknowledged and verified more than what we are actually given. So now, our fourth question of tonight is, should our hijab comply with society? If a society such as Quebec or France, or there's many other societies in which they actually ban the hijab from being worn, should I, as someone who lives in Quebec, comply with this and remove the hijab and continue my life normally? Of course, I'm going to disagree with this, but I want to explain why it's important for us to choose hijab. Well, first we have to acknowledge that wearing the hijab is a difficult task in society. It's a difficult task in a Western society. It's actually a difficult task to wear, even when you go to Muslim countries, even when you go to Lebanon and Iraq and Iran, even when you go there, wearing the hijab can be difficult sometimes. So it's actually important for us to first acknowledge that, yes, it is difficult to wear the hijab. I'm not sugarcoating anything. It is difficult. But just like any other form of obligation, such as fasting, such as praying, those are difficult tasks as well for us to comply to. And so what that means is that when you decide to wear and when you decide to fulfill God's commands in wearing the hijab, then it's important for you to understand that you are now sacrificing. And you need to be able to actually be up to it and be up to the magnitude of sacrificing everything you have. You see, when we talk about Imam Hussein, we say that Imam Hussein sacrificed everything to his last breath. And Sayyidah Zainab equally sacrificed everything to her last breath. Every single Imam sacrificed everything they had to their last breath, as well as every single follower, like devoted follower. And so when we talk about sacrifice, you need to be willing to sacrifice your job, your safety, your security, your ability to, your comfort. You need to be willing to sacrifice all of that for the hijab. When you decide to take on the obligation of wearing the hijab, that means that sacrifice is going to entail with it. That means that you are now directly telling God, whatever you throw at me, I am going to be willing to take it. And so Quebec is unrightly and unjustly forcing you to choose between living life and religion. And of course, it's important for us to actually choose religion, because that takes us to the next part, is your sacrifice means your submission to Allah's will and Allah's command, and nothing on earth can be more beautiful than your submission to God. Honestly, nothing can be more pure than the fragrance of seeing someone devoted to God and seeing someone sacrifice every inch they have to God. And what I say as a closing note for Quebec is, in the Holy Quran, we know that there's this famous verse, but they plan and Allah plans, and Allah is the best of planners. So whatever this Western society decides to do with Islam, whatever America decides to label Islam, whatever Canada decides to do with Islam, it's meaningless. It truly is meaningless. We should never try to conform to their analysis of what Islam and hijab is, because it's whatever Allah plans is what will be achieved. And more than that, merely the fact that Al-Hujjah, Al-Qa'im, is safeguarding our religion, is making sure that our religion is safeguarded from the enemies of Islam, we know that our religion is safe in the hands of Allah. And we know that our dedication and our submission to God is more important than our submission to society. Can wearing the proper hijab truly impact a person's life? When I decide to fulfill some of my spiritual perfection and wear the proper hijab, I look Allah in the eyes and I tell Allah, oh Allah, today I have decided that from now on I am going to dress more modestly. I'm going to conform to you by wearing clothes that are very loose fitted. I am going to wear clothes that are not so fashion and beautify myself with makeup. When I make that decision, can that actually impact a person's life? And of course it can. It's honestly, I don't know if it needs a discussion, because when you decide that wearing the hijab is the most important thing for you, then when you wear the hijab under its strict guidelines, such as I am not going to show my wrists, I am not going to raise my gaze, I am not going to show my neck. When you start to obey those commands and be more careful with those commands, then you will instantly start to become more careful with how you pray, with how you fast, with how you obey your parents, with how you are in society. Wearing the proper hijab means that you do not partake in listening to music. It means that you do not partake in touching non-mahram, in touching people that are unlawful to you. It means that you do not partake in dressing seductively. And so, of course, you're becoming closer to God. Because our main issue in this society is that we've become too friendly with God. We've taken God almost, astaghfirullah, as our casual friend. We accept God into our house whenever we want, and we tell God, okay, you can leave now whenever we want, similarly. And so it's important for us to acknowledge how friendly we become with God. And it needs to be a balance. You need to have fear of who you worship. When you prostrate down to God, you need to have fear in your heart of who you prostrate down to. You have to live a life in which I am afraid to disobey God in anything I do. Yet at the same time, so long as you breathe, so long as you are alive in this temporary world, you have to know that Allah has provided you with His endless amount of mercy and forgiveness towards sin if you are willing to change and if you are willing to take a step towards Him. And so, comfort or conformity, which one do we choose? Well, if you were to tell me that you are going to choose comfort, then I'm going to tell you that no matter what you do in this world, no matter if that is what you are chasing, you will never find comfort. If you remove the hijab so that you can be more comfortable in society, so that it can be easier for you to live in society, you're never going to become comfortable because what you are chasing does not exist. It's not available in this world. You might become comfortable for a mere few seconds, but it's not going to be the comfort that you are searching for. The only comfort you will ever have is comfort in knowing that no one on earth loves you more than Allah, and no one on earth believes in you more than Allah, and no one on earth wants you to succeed more than Allah. That is the only comfort that you will ever have to be able to gain in this world. If I were to talk about conformity, of course conformity. Choose conformity 100 times over. Conform to Allah's command, conform to Allah's wishes, conform to what Allah wills. You know, your whole purpose on earth, the reason you were born, the reason why your mother was pregnant with you for 9 months and gave birth to you, and Allah took care of you by making sure you are still alive until today, is because Allah believes that you are capable to reach to your perfection, and it's because He wants you to conform to His will. He wants you to conform to His law, His decree, the religion of Al-Muhammad. That is exactly why we are alive until today. And so there are two issues when it comes to discussing the hijab, and I will end off here. The first issue is that a lot of the times, many females, when they remove the hijab, they say they remove the hijab because they are not in love with the hijab, because they do not feel like they are able to wear the hijab properly anymore. You know, their religion is here and the hijab is here, and they just want to bring, the hijab, they just want to remove the hijab so that they can, equally reflect where the religion is. They say that I am not feeling that the hijab is right anymore, I need to take it off. Or what they say is, I do not love the hijab anymore. My question to them is, who told them they ever have to love the hijab? I'm kind of confused as to where in the Quran or where in the Ahl al-Bayt, in their ahadith, they have ever acknowledged that we have to love the hijab. No, you're not supposed to love the hijab. What you're supposed to do is love worshiping Allah. That's merely it. You are supposed to adore worshiping Allah. You are supposed to want to worship God. And the hijab is only a vessel that we have towards worshiping Allah. That's merely the purpose of the hijab. Just as prayer is a vessel that we use in order to worship God, the hijab is a vessel that we wear so that we can worship God and show God, oh Allah, I am your servant. I am trying to remove this love for this dunya from my heart, and I'm only trying to obey you. That is it. I'm only trying to love you. The second issue that we have with the hijab is so many times people will say that, society has changed. We live in a Western society. The society we live in, it doesn't need a hijab anymore. At the time of the Prophet, there was no police state. Females were in danger, and so of course they had to wear the hijab. Right now, we don't have to wear the hijab anymore. Or what they say is that, society hates me for wearing the hijab. They've denounced that the hijab is a dangerous thing, and so I want to comply society's wishes and remove the hijab. My question to these females and males is, when you try to conform to society, society, even if you were to remove the hijab, society will never accept you because you are Muslim. Even if you were to wear the hijab in a more fashionable manner, such as, showing a little bit of your hair or earrings or those very fashionable turban hijabs that we are seeing, even if you were to wear the hijab in that manner, society will never accept you into its arms, because society has denounced that the hijab is a dehumanizing practice, an oppressive practice, and ultimately that Islam is the dehumanizing practice. And so no matter what you try to comply to society, you are never going to be able to fulfill society's wishes. You are never being able to actually comply to what society wants, because ultimately society does not want to see Islam, period. And so I will end my discussion here with Q&A, I believe. But just an ending note to all the males that have a responsibility towards their mothers, towards their sisters, towards their wife, towards their daughters with the hijab, towards all my sisters listening. If I were to just give you an end remark, I would truly say that the most important thing you need to do is to meditate and to focus on what you prioritize to be important in this world and how you can strengthen that. And if anything comes up to your mind, if you are fearful of how much money you are going to lose if you were to pay khumus, or you are fearful of how you are going to pray in a public state and people are going to look at you, if that is what you think of as important, then I need to tell you to reevaluate. I advise you to reevaluate what you believe is important. Because if anything other than worshiping Allah comes up to be important in your perspective, then everything else is meaningless. And ultimately your life is going a route of meaningless. And so we need to have this brotherhood and sisterhood where females will feel more comfortable with encouraging other females to wear the proper hijab. And similarly, more males will comply to their form of modesty and encourage their spouses or their sisters to wear the proper hijab more properly. And so thank you very much for everyone's time. I do believe it's question and answers.
Yes, thank you, Sahar, for this very, very beneficial and inspiring presentation. We will now have a Q&A period, which will be followed by a Q&A only for sisters. So if you have any questions, feel free to raise your hand to ask it yourself, or you can write it down in the chat or send it to me if you want me to ask it for you. So we already have a first question. It says, Assalamu alaikum. There are women who say that they are not ready to wear it yet. They are waiting for Allah to put her on the right path. Are they right? Will Allah make it easier for them to decide to wear the hijab, or should they take the first step?
So the first thing I need to tell everyone that unfortunately a lot of us have really become untouched with is when we think about this dunya, we think that we are in this dunya and God is here, and then that's it. They forget that there's shaitan over here, and there are angels over here, and there's Allah's work over here. And so this very common phrase of I am not ready for it should honestly never be tolerated. It should never be accepted. And it is so tolerated in our community because we almost feel sorry for the girl, and so we almost respect her wishes. But it's actually the opposite. You know, if you actually care for that person, you would care for their akhirah, you would care for where they are going, you would care for that this person can ultimately die, and she would not be wearing the hijab, which is a sin. And so this understanding of I am not ready for wearing the hijab should really be questioned. Because are you not ready for wearing the hijab, or are you not ready to sacrifice the comfort of not wearing the hijab? Because it's comfortable not wearing the hijab. It is. It's easier for me to take off the hijab and to blend with society than for me to wear the hijab and be this oppressive person in the Western imagination. It's easier. But in order for the girl to actually take that step towards God, she needs to wear the hijab first. You see, when they tell you, if you were to go to someone that's praying wrong, you know, you see someone, he's maybe they're reading Surah Al-Fatiha wrong, or while they're praying, they have been mixing it up so that they pray Salat al-Subh with 4 rakat, let's say, for example. Would you tell that person to stop praying? Would you tell that person, you know, you shouldn't be praying anymore? You've been praying wrong? Or say that person stopped praying for a period of time. Would you tell that person just wait for Allah to send you a sign, and when Allah sends you the sign, then you should start praying again? Of course not. You're going to tell that person, take that first step, start praying, and Allah will actually guide you from there. And so similarly, for those girls that say that they are not ready for wearing the hijab, you need to be able to actually stop those devils, stop the shayateen that are telling you you are not ready, and say Bismillah and actually look Allah in the eyes and tell him, even if I do not feel ready inside, I am going to be wearing the hijab, I need your support. And honestly, with all the help of how much lectures there are online, with how much support there are from other females, this female has really no ability to go look Allah in the eye and tell him that I was ill-advised and I never wore the hijab. In this day and age, she has no ability because we have the internet. So there is nothing that the female can actually go to Allah with if she is not wearing the hijab and justify why she is not wearing the hijab. The only reason, of course, that someone could take off the hijab is if they were going to be slaughtered, if they were going to be killed. Other than that, there is no presentable reason for her argument. And so, of course, anyone saying this statement, I would advise them to wear the hijab that second, because at that second is exactly when they need to stop that shaitan from advising her otherwise. And it needs to be, I'm not trying to be hard, I'm not trying to be strict, but we have been sugarcoating how much we look at Islam and how much we see the hijab in Islam. We have been sugarcoating it so much to mean something so much less than what it actually is. And that's where it actually becomes very, very difficult and very scary.
Well, related to that question, we have another one that says, Salam, a friend of mine, her husband forbids her from wearing the hijab. They have a son, so leaving would be breaking up a family. I advised her to wear it everywhere he isn't. Was that advice okay to give?
Sorry, I never heard the third part of the question.
It says, I'm going to repeat the whole thing. Sorry.
No,
It
just
says
the last part.
at the end, it says, I advised her to wear it everywhere he isn't. Was that advice okay to give?
Okay, so this question is very, very difficult, and I do not, I need to make it clear to everyone, I do not want to represent something that I'm not. I'm not an Islamic scholar. And when I say that is I've taken some years of Islamic housing, but that does not, my husband is a sheikh, but that does not qualify me to become a scholar, an Islamic scholar. And so I do want to clarify that to everyone. However, with this question, there's something in which even your parents, if your parents were to stop you, or your husband were to stop you from doing something that is fundamentally Islamically obligatory on you, then you actually have the right to tell your parents, no, I am going to do that. So for example, if your parents were to forbid you from praying, they have forbid you from praying, you must pray. Even if it were to be in the most simplest way in which they cannot see you, it is mandatory for you to pray. Just because they have said that, that does not mean that they have removed the obligation of prayer. Similarly, if this husband is telling her that she is not allowed to wear the hijab, I do not want to be the person that would encourage for divorce. But for the sister to understand that in the society we are in today, we have rights, we have decisions, we have the ability to live a life rightfully on our own. And the issue is that she either needs to go and take her husband first and sit with a scholar and of course have that discussion with an Islamic scholar, a sheikh, and have that very hard discussion, or it does need to go to the route of divorce. Because if this person is telling her that he does not want her to wear something that is obligatory on her, and she will be held accountable on the day of judgment for that, then who knows what he's going to do if she gets a female daughter, or if her son wants to marry a hijabi. Who knows how this can actually affect her in the long run, and who knows how this will actually affect how she wears. Her decision to comply to him will affect her as well. And so I do recommend for further for this female to actually get bigger help, because it is an extremely serious issue that needs to be personalized with a sheikh, and maybe even therapy, but it needs to be, of course, discussed more intimately.
Okay. So the person says, I understand. Thank you for your time. There's also another question that says, what can we say to a girl that removes the hijab to help her?
Okay, for this, it needs to be understood that the first thing that you need to do is amr bil ma'ruf wa nahy an munkar. And so if you're able to talk to the girl, you have to talk to the girl. The next thing is that you can't show that you are actually supportive of this action. What that means is that I do not recommend anyone to kick their daughter out if she decides to not wear the hijab. I do not recommend anyone to actually start to beat their daughter or wife if they decide to remove the hijab. That's not what I mean. But what I mean is that you do need to show that you do not, that you're displeased, that you are displeased. And so it even becomes obligatory on you to not even smile, so that you do not give the impression that what that person is doing is actually correct. And so if someone were to remove the hijab, if they're willing to have that discussion with you, that's great. But if that person does not want to have that discussion with you and does not want to realize that they have consciously made the decision to obey Islam, which means that they have to obey every single commandment in Islam, then there's nothing really that you can do. That person needs to come to that understanding that this is obligatory. I'm not doing this because I love this practice. I'm doing it because God has made it obligatory, period. And so if there's nothing really more than that, that you can say to a person that has decided that they want to follow the dunya and follow their desires rather than follow God. They need to take the first step towards following God. But likewise, you need to do Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy an Munkar. If you can advise them, so be it, advise them. And if you cannot, do not show that you are actually encouraging this practice whatsoever. But of course, do not take it to the extreme.
There's also another question that says, Assalamu alaikum, sister. Is there a definition of how to wear the hijab, meaning how wide the clothes are and etc.?
If you were to look at any scholars, marja, what they say about fatwa, about the hijab, every single one will not say that the hijab needs to be worn like an abaya. They won't tell the female you have to wear abaya, or you have to wear shador, or you have to wear an ishar, not a mandil, which is the other scarf. They will never say that. If you were to look at the fatwa literally says that the female has to wear modest clothing, loose fit, clothing that is not attractable, clothing that does not show her figure, clothing that does not emphasize the body parts that do not need to be emphasized. That's merely it. That's the hijab. Of course, the hijab extends to how the female is around non-mahram, around men, how the female is in public situations, her voice, whether she speaks seductively or not, what she is talking about. All of this is a part of the hijab. And so the hijab is likewise her verbal and non-verbal communication. But that's merely it for the hijab. Sorry, if I were to extend, if they were to look at the most basic understanding of the hijab, then of course it would be to cover all body part except for the face. But the chin area needs to be covered, the toes need to be covered based on the maraja, the feet, except for in prayer, she's allowed if there's no mahram. The hands needs to be covered except for, of course, any part under the wrist. If that's the most basic of the hijab, just to clarify that.
Someone is asking, I heard that a hijabi can't wear pants.
Sorry, I never heard the ending. Pants? Oh, pants.
Pants, yeah.
Oh, okay. So again, the marja will never say she's not allowed to wear pants. However, if they were to talk about what the most perfect form of hijab would be, it would be the abaya. No questions asked, it would be the abaya, which is, of course, a very loose dress that is covered. But a marja will never say that she's not allowed to wear pants. So it's not haram to wear pants in public, so long that she makes sure that her figure isn't showing.
Okay. So there's another question that says, social media has taken so much space in our lives. What is your opinion on liking, commenting pictures of girls who have removed their hijab? Opinions are mixed, but I think it's important for people to know how much it has an impact.
Okay. So it's so important for us to know that our social media is really a reflection of who we are internally. So our social media has now become, if you want to look at who this person is, if you want to look at who your spouse or your friend is, just go take their social media and see what they like and what they don't like. That's honestly, it's become a reflection of who we are. And so if someone were to, again, it goes back to Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy an Munkar. If you were to like a picture of someone who has recently removed the hijab or has removed the hijab, then again, you are encouraging this individual that what you have done, I applaud you. Congratulations, you look so beautiful. I encourage you to continue on with what you're doing in these posts. No, of course, we have to remove liking and following all these females that have removed the hijab. We have to stop following anyone that wears an improper hijab, anyone that advocates for music and hijab, anyone that advocates for swearing and twerking and dancing wearing the hijab. All of these on social media really need to be demoted on everyone's social media. And so it's extremely important for us to publicly disapprove this. Of course, you don't have to go, it's not necessary for you to go comment you are haram or anything like that on the lady's feed. But just do not promote it. That's it. Merely unlike it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So there's another question that says, Assalamu alaikum, would it be better to not wear the hijab if we doubt being dedicated to wearing it properly our whole life, knowing that the hijab represents Islam?
And so again, this question actually goes back to our lecture. If you were to not wear the hijab because you doubt yourself, then it's actually you conforming to shaitan's commands of actually removing the hijab, because it's actually the contrary. So long that you are breathing, so long that you are alive, so long that you sleep and you wake up the next day, you actually have a responsibility in front of God to ask him for his forgiveness and for his guidance. You know, what's so sad in our generation is we are so naive and ignorant to the fact that Imam Mahdi is present, and we do not ask him for any support. We do not verbally and non-verbally, such as right, ask Imam al-Mahdi for guidance. We don't tell Imam al-Mahdi, you know, I want to strive to be one of your followers. Please make it so that it is. And so it's really important for those that have those feelings to actually fight against it. You know, if you're feeling like your worship is useless, great. You took the first step. You acknowledge that, you know, you might be doing a lousy job worshiping Allah. You took the first step. Now take the second step and actually start improving. And then take the third step and actually start mapping up a plan. And then take the fourth step. See how much of a comfort zone you have towards improving, such as if the female was showing her neck previously, I'm not going to encourage you to go start wearing the abaya. No, slow down, sister. Just start covering your neck. That's it. Stay a week covering your neck. Next, actually maybe start, you know, covering the chin area. Next, maybe start wearing znud, the things that cover your wrists. Take it step by step. But why are you being so defeated as though you're dead? No, you're still alive. You still have a chance. It's simply put. Was there another?
Afwan, Sarah is gone, so there are two hands raised. Maybe we'll start with Muhammad Nasir.
Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you so much for your lecture. My question might be a little bit long, but I think it's a little bit important. So you've mentioned Bill 21. The problem that people that had started Bill 21 is with their inaccurate arguments and reasons that were rooted from secularism, as you said. Their main goal is to destroy religions and force a specific system on all of us that fulfills their needs, whether it's a communist or a capitalism system. As long as it's good for them, they won't stop. I have personally noticed that Muslim people does not have a unique definition for hijab here in the West. Same for Jews and Christians with their religious symbols. Even defining hijab as a religious symbol is not accurate, I think. I'm not sure about that.
Yeah.
Instead of replying to their incorrect arguments, for example, when they say hijab is an obligation on little girls that are 9 years old, which is horrible, we directly switch to defensive mode and we start trying to prove that hijab is our choice, which is wrong. Therefore, we should cut the roots of this ideology. I'm being subjective here, I'm giving my opinion, but the problem is I'm just trying to find a long-term solution for it, not a short-term solution. But the question is how, because we've tried doing protests here, participating in protests. It aren't coming with any results. Even talking on social media weren't coming with any good results also.
Yeah, I also saw that they tried to make they actually took it to court and tried to actually make it legitimized through court to actually ban it as well. And that didn't work, obviously. Honestly, in the first, what the issue with Quebec is there is such a deep-rooted hatred towards Islam that is a part of their Islamophobia and is rooted in why they actually disapprove with the hijab. It's rooted in the so many years of how much they have actually, when you talk about Quebec, you have to actually reflect Quebec on the French society, because Quebec was really nothing until the French state obviously empowered it and gave it its society. And so when you look at the French ideologies and their root principle with the hijab and Islam, it is centuries of hatred because of how many, of course, of how they have colonized Muslim regions and how they have fundamentally seen that the hijab is directly related to the person's religion, and so they want to remove the understanding of what the hijab is. And so this bill is so dangerous, yet I really do not see anything anyone can do other than just try and wear the best perfect hijab that they need to wear, and honestly move away from that society, because they are trying to legitimately remove the hijab from any place that a child would see the hijab, such as a teacher. They do not want that child to be affected by the hijab. And so until this is resolved, and I, of course, I'm not able to come up with the most practical reason for how we can remove this illegitimate and this law that really goes against our basic human rights. Until that can actually be denounced and how that can actually come up, it is so important for the Muslims to have such a strong community of actually making sure that the Islam between them is a fire in which they feel empowered to wear the hijab, and if not, they can move to a community that will actually encourage the hijab at a better rate, and actually make it so that more people are more in love with the hijab than more people are actually complying to Bill 21. It is so unfortunate that this bill is actually happening right now, but the truth is they do not want to hear us. They know that we are not oppressed. They know that we are happy wearing the hijab. In all the research that I was doing, whenever a hijabi would say that I am happy wearing the hijab, it was immediately denounced as illegitimate. And so it's exactly like you're saying, they do not want to actually use that in the argument. And if you want to go to a feminist perspective, I wear, it's my right, they're going to denounce it as well, because Islam is from a patriarchal perspective, technically, under their understanding. So honestly, the only way that we will ever be able to support our community is for us to actually internalize our Islam and to wear our proper hijab. You see, if we were to reflect on Ahl al-Bayt, when Imam al-Hussein or Imam Ali were wrongfully taken away from their Khalifa, from their position in Islam, they tried to fight it back, to, of course, however much they could, but at one point they stopped, to a point where even Imam Ali, where Omar says, if it wasn't for Imam Ali, I would not have been able to actually successfully, in his eyes, being an imam, because Imam Ali used to tell Omar, do this with the hukum, or do this and advise him. And so Imam Ali at that point actually understood that the most important thing that he has to do is just take care of Islam to the best of his ability. And similarly for us, with this bill, we are I don't want to say powerless, because that would mean to give up hope. But honestly, it is just that we need to be more strong and more powerful with our belief first, so that inshallah, Imam al-Mahdi can empower us, and we will be able to actually take over what is rightfully ours. But there has to be an understanding that it actually starts with us first. It starts with our beliefs and our perspective. I do hope that this answered the question.
Yeah, thank you so much. You've mentioned something very important, which is we have to be one group. And the thing here in Canada, unfortunately, from what I'm seeing is that we are not one group. Even between Shias, there's problems. So how about doing a group with Sunnis and other Muslims from other nations? It's a long road.
It's a very long road. Inshallah, I only see hope in us fixing ourselves. That's really what I would actually advise everyone, is just for them to first start with themselves, because we're so much focusing on the community at whole, where our homes do not even reflect an Islamic home anymore. You know, our lifestyle at home is not resembling that which would make Imam Mahdi proud. And so let's start with the family first, and on its own, a community would be built. On its own, Imam al-Mahdi would actually, he would make it possible for these communities to grow stronger. That is truly my belief.
Inshallah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
So we will now have the last question from a brother. I think it's Abu Dhar. He has his hand raised. And then I'm going to ask all the brothers to leave the Zoom so we can have a Q&A just for the sisters. So Abu Dhar, you can go ahead.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for your lecture, really beneficial. My question was that there's a lot of men out there who might have daughters, wives, sisters, mothers who don't observe the hijab. So how does one practice Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahy anil Munkar without kind of like, because it is a sensitive topic, how does one approach that with them? So that was just my question.
Yeah, it's a very important question, because, you know, the first thing Islam ever tells us when we talk about Amr bil Ma'ruf or in any single hukum, in every single hukum, Allah tells us that if there is any possibility that it's going to harm you, then do not do it. So if there's any chance, even if it's like, you know, like the possibility, you know, if I am going to, I can't come up with something, but if I were to say Salamu Alaikum to someone and that's going to harm me, then don't say Salamu Alaikum. If it's going to harm me in a sense that, you know, I would be disrespected in the community, or I would be killed, or I would be anything, or I'd be humiliated, then don't say it. It actually almost becomes obligatory for you to not do it. And so with Amr bil Ma'ruf, especially the hijab, like I said in the beginning of this discussion, the hijab has become so personalized that females almost take the hijab and they reflect it directly on them. So if you tell them anything on their hijab, you're directly insulting them. And that's an issue with the females, that they have personalized it to that matter. Because just like any other obligation, if you are fasting wrong, then someone needs to be able to have that discussion with you, that you are fasting incorrectly, you need to improve it. And so when we talk about the hijab, because of how sensitive the topic has become, if a brother has an issue with someone that is wearing the hijab incorrectly, there has to be a time and place that they can actually discuss it with that person. But before that, they actually have to see if that person is actually even receptive to even accept them to talk. Sometimes there's so much hassasiyah, there's so much sensitivity to the person directing the information. So it's because my husband is telling me this, then I'm not going to listen. You know, sometimes it's better if a sister, if you ask a friend or someone that female accepts her words, sometimes it's better to actually ask them to directly talk to them about it, to make it a group project, than to make it on your shoulders, because that will actually sometimes harm you more than you are trying to do. And so it is important for for the males to be more educated on the proper hijab, so that they can actually observe it in their families, and so that they can actually inspire this love in their daughters in wearing the hijab and in their wife. However, there is a time and place, and there is manners. So it has to be known that sometimes it's better to not even discuss it with the person if it's going to harm you, but to find ways to do it, such as asking friends, or maybe going together to see a sheikh to fix all of your Islamic problems, not just that issue of the hijab, but maybe there's other issues as well. So a collectivity of me and you improving so that we can become closer to Allah.
Jazakallah, thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you to all the brothers for attending the seminar. I'm going to kindly ask you to leave the meeting, please, so that we can have a Q&A just for the sisters.
Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much.
Walaikum salam. Thank you.
I'm going to go ahead with the sisters.